Have you ever had a moment that made your skin crawl? A shadow where there shouldn't be one? A whisper in an empty room, or something you simply can't explain? If so, we want to hear from you. Here at the Haunted UK podcast, we're always on the lookout for spine-tingling stories to feature in our end-of-season listener episodes and our short haunt series. Whether it's a chilling encounter, a mysterious experience, or something that's haunted you for years, we want your tale. Send your story to contact us at hauntedukpodcast.com. And don't forget to follow us on social media. Facebook, X at hauntedukpod, TikTok and Instagram at hauntedukpodcast, or visit our website www.hauntedukpodcast.com. Now, if you love what we do and want even more haunted goodies, then you can support the show on Patreon and Ko-fi. We've got 2 brilliant tiers, Possessed and Spooked, both packed with bonus content, exclusive episodes, and extra material that'll keep you up all night. But that's not all. We've launched a brand new sister podcast, Haunted UK Fiction, and we're calling all storytellers. Whether you're a published author, an aspiring writer, or someone with a natural gift for spinning eerie tales, we're looking for original fictional short stories and novellas with strong paranormal or supernatural themes. Think suspenseful, mysterious, atmospheric, terrifying, thought-provoking, even darkly magical. If your story is selected, we'll professionally narrate, record, mix and master it into an audiobook-style format, then feature it on the show. You'll get a copy of the finished production to use however you like, and you'll retain full ownership of your work. Submit your story to hauntedukfiction@hotmail.com and follow us on Instagram at hauntedukfiction. So whether it's truth or fiction, if it's haunted, we want it. Now, sit back and enjoy the episode. When I was in my teens, one of my friends lived in an old farmhouse on a road named after the original owner, Seth Morehouse. One evening, we were in her room and the radiator started gurgling. My friend said, "Seth is here." The words were barely out of her mouth when her closet door opened. She told Seth that it was okay, that he could come out, and the door swung shut. Her closet was located in the eaves of the old house. It was fairly large and ran in a narrow space parallel to her bedroom wall. To my utter confusion, amazement and terror, I woke up the next morning, lying in that closet. This is episode 70, part 3 of the Haunted UK podcast, and for the 3rd time this season, it's time to hear more of your amazing stories. We're halfway through our set of listener stories episodes. Parts 1 and 2 were both chilling and brilliant, and now we have even more of your stories to share. As always, it's been both a pleasure and in some cases, a terrifying time reading through all the experiences that have been sent in, and we can't wait for you to hear this collection. So dim the lights and get comfortable. It's time to hand it over to the listeners. Our first story takes place in the early 1990s at the childhood home of one of our listeners, where a lingering presence would make itself known, sometimes in a terrifying way. Here is their story. Back when I was living with my parents in Exeter, Devon, in the mid to late 1980s, I experienced something that I can't explain. My parents bought a house that needed a total renovation. Once the renovations were complete, we lived peacefully without any strange experiences for a good 6 or 7 years. For some reason, from the time I was 15 years old, unsettling, unexplained events began to occur, which continued until I moved out at the age of 24. It started with something waking me up at 3 a.m. I felt like I was being restrained by something I couldn't see, as though something was holding my ankles and putting pressure on my stomach. This resulted in me having red marks left on my skin. As the pressure lifted, I saw a white ball of light, shaped like a polo mint, move towards my window before disappearing. This continued to happen every night at 3 a.m. I became distressed and would rush to my parents' room to tell them what had happened, but they didn't believe me. One night my dad decided to sleep in my bedroom, and at 3 a.m. something threw his alarm clock across the room. While that was going on, I was with my mum in my parents' room, and something tried to drag me out of their bed. My dad was reluctant to describe what he experienced and wanted to sleep in my room again to make sense of the strange goings-on. The following night, the same thing happened again. At the time, we had a black cat called Tammy, and we tried to put her in my bedroom, but she became very distressed, arched her back in fear, and ran out of the room. My mum was at home one day and heard the front door open, followed by someone running up the stairs. She presumed it was me coming home after finishing my day at college early. After calling up the stairs and getting no reply, she went up and looked around, only to discover there was nobody in the house but her. At the age of 24, I moved into my own house just a 5-minute walk from my parents. One dark winter evening, my mum rang to say there was a silhouette of a man stood outside the French doors, looking in. My husband quickly ran down to their house, but when he arrived there was no one around. The man had disappeared. My mum and dad's neighbours, who had lived in their house since marriage, had never heard about our experiences. One day, out of the blue, they told us that they were in their dining room when they saw a soldier walk through the wall from our house into theirs. Needless to say, they were quite shaken. My mum then went on to tell them about our experiences over the years. There were several other small occurrences. For example, when I was alone in the house, I would hear someone going up the stairs, but I was always too afraid to look, so I just sat in the front room with the door closed until my parents got home. One day, my dad met a builder from Torquay who offered to come to the house with a woman who claimed that spirits could speak through her. They came to the house early one evening, and it was a very strange experience. The outcome was there was a woman in the house waiting for her husband to come back from World War I. I'm not sure how I feel about all of this, but for what it's worth, they didn't charge any money. My parents eventually moved as they wanted a bungalow and to do another renovation, and they've never experienced anything else since leaving that house. Thanks very much. Our next story, sent in by Jane, recalls memories of time spent with her grandfather, but whether he was alive or not at the time is a question that remains unanswered. Hi Steve, I've been listening to your podcast for a few months, and I love the listener stories. I have a story which is difficult to explain. I'm not sure what order to put things in to make it all make sense, or even if it would be of interest to you. I'll tell the story chronologically to see what you think. When I was little, my family and I would often visit my grandparents, who still lived in the house where my dad had grown up. We used to spend time in the room at the back of the house, where there was a dining area and a living area with a couple of armchairs. My grandparents had kept my dad's old toys, and we used to play with those on the floor in the living area of that back room. Now that I think about it, that room must have been south-facing, because I remember it always being bright. Plus my dad had a small obsession with south-facing gardens, which perhaps he inherited from his parents. There was a living room at the front of the house, which was a lot more formal. It was also significantly colder than the back room, hence my thoughts about aspect of the house. When I was older and taking piano lessons, I had to go into that room and practice as the piano was in there. I hated going into that room and sitting there alone playing the piano. I always felt like someone was in the room with me, behind my back, watching me. I was desperate to get out of there, but if I left the room, I'd be told off for trying to cut my piano practice short and sent right back in there. My grandfather died when I was 4 years old. Whenever we were together in that house as a family, either before my grandfather died or after, we always used the back room. We never used the front room as a family, right up until my grandmother moved out of the house when I was a teenager. I have at least one very distinct memory of sitting in the front room with my grandfather, just the two of us. In my memory, it was a normal occurrence, and we were just sitting there chatting. When I think about it logically now, I can think of no reason why he would take one of his 3 small grandchildren into a separate room just to have an ordinary conversation, nor why my grandmother, who was extremely strict, would allow a child so small to hang out in the formal living room. Also, if he had taken one of us aside for a private chat, it would have been my older brother, who he utterly adored, not me. I very distinctly remember asking my grandfather how old he was, and his response being to tell me what year he was born and to get me to figure out his age. In his life, my grandfather was a joker, especially with us kids, and when asked his age, his usual response was, as old as my tongue and a little older than my teeth. But on this occasion, I distinctly remember him telling me his birth year, and I figured out his age from there. Now this is what took me half a lifetime to realize. I'm pretty bright, but I don't think that I was a preschool maths genius. I also don't know all that many 4-year-olds, but I don't think that they're generally that hot on mental arithmetic at such a young age. I recently asked my dad, and he didn't think that his dad would go around giving mental arithmetic challenges to a child under 8 years old. My grandfather was born in 1909 and died in 1983. So that maths would not have been particularly easy just prior to his death. So what do you think? Did my brain invent this memory? Or did my grandfather keep talking with me after he died, until I got old enough to process what death was and got freaked out? Is that why he answered the question about his age in such a way, because he had stopped aging and stopped being quite so physically attached to his tongue and teeth? And is that why I was so terrified of being in that room alone in my later childhood? Because I feared receiving visits from beyond the grave again? Or was he still there, watching, and sensed his presence but was too frightened to engage? Kind regards, Jane. The next story involves all sorts of eerie and unsettling occurrences in listener Caleb's life, from his mother's experience with signs from his departed grandmother, to a terrifying encounter while he was alone one night, and finally, the chilling idea of seeing a loved one's doppelganger. Here are his stories. Hi there, Steve. I'm glad to know you're still accepting listener stories, as mine have never been told outside of my immediate family circle, and I'd love to share them with you and the audience. I'm happy for you to include any names, dates, or places that I use without alteration. Honestly, I'm not quite sure where to start, as I've had what I would consider a relatively large number of experiences despite only being 26. There's been nothing in terms of full-on hauntings, feelings of unease, or really any negativity whatsoever. I mentioned in my last email about my experience with a doppelganger, which occurred in my parents' house, so I think I'll begin with a couple of stories from this location. I'd also like to say, firstly, that nobody in my family is particularly religious or spiritual. My dad's great aunt was apparently a medium, but she passed before I was born. However, we've all had either shared or individual experiences and firmly believe in the paranormal. Neither I nor anyone else has ever felt unwelcome or any form of unease in this house. When I was 8 years old, we moved from a town in North Wales to where we are currently living now in Haverfordwest, Pembrokeshire, in early 2007. We moved into a mid-terraced house that was built sometime between 1880 and 1900. I don't particularly remember anything untoward happening to either myself, my parents, or my brother in the first few years. The first experience I can remember any of us having in this house was shortly after my maternal grandmother passed after a brief but sudden and horrible illness. It was 2011, and me, my brother, and my dad were at home while my mum was at work. My grandmother had been taken to hospital and we got the dreaded call with the news that she only had a couple of days at most to live. My dad called my mum and she rushed back from work early. We hastily packed a few things and immediately began the 4-hour drive up north. We'd made it about halfway when we received another call. She'd passed. When we first got the news that she only had a few days left, my grandfather, who was with her at the time, let her go and get some belongings as she'd be staying in the hospital. Unfortunately, he hadn't made it back in time either. I personally believe that because nobody had the chance to say goodbye, she came back to do so. My brother and I had an experience which we believe was her saying goodbye to us, but as that didn't happen in our house in Haverfordwest, I will tell that story another time. This particular story involves my mum. My grandmother was a character and a very strong woman with the attitude to match. She had her own particular armchair in the living room next to the fireplace, which had her ashtray sat atop of it. She would smoke indoors, which was quite common back in her day. A short time after her passing, my mother began smelling the scent of cigarettes whenever she would pass by one particular chair in our house. I'm not sure when exactly it began or ended, but I know it was a regularly occurring, though infrequent experience. Incidentally, this was the chair my grandmother would claim as hers whenever she would visit. She never smoked in our house. My mum explicitly forbade it. In fact, nobody smoked indoors. My father was and is a smoker, but he goes outside to do what he needs to do, so it doesn't stink up the inside of the house. As I said, this was a familiar reoccurrence, yet it only ever happened to my mother, and only when she was in the house alone. After quite a few occasions of smelling it, my mother had had enough and said out loud, "Stop smoking in my house." After she said this, the smell of cigarettes never reappeared. When I was around 14 or 15, I was up late one night. I've always been a bit of a night owl. I remember it was the small hours of the morning, possibly around 2 a.m. I decided it was time for bed, but thought I'd get a drink before I hunkered down for the night. I made my way downstairs, through the living room and into the kitchen, then proceeded to pour myself a glass of water from the tap. I drank this hastily, and then started to make my way out of the room to head back to bed. As I was walking through the door, I reached my arm back and around the wall to flick the light switch off. Almost as soon as I'd flicked it off, I felt the sensation of a hand grabbing mine. It wasn't malicious or aggressive, but it was the distinct feeling of another hand grabbing my own. I immediately bolted up the stairs and into my room in a state of terror, trying desperately to convince myself that it was my imagination. I sat awake, scared until probably around 4 a.m, waiting for a demon to burst through my bedroom door and drag me down to the depths of hell. Fortunately, this never came. Instead, I soon passed out, and before I knew it, I was waking up in daylight. As far as I know, this has never happened to anybody else in our household and hasn't happened to me since. Now, I'll get on to the original reason I contacted you in the first place: the doppelganger. I hadn't seen an apparition in this house before or even after this happened, and I genuinely have no idea why it happened at all. I was stood in the kitchen with my mum and the mother of my daughter, who is now my ex. To give you a brief layout of the house, it's a terraced house, but almost as if it were two regular terraced houses without a wall in between them. The living room is long and rectangular, with the front room in the middle and the stairs from the upper floor bringing you out into the bottom right corner of the living room, if you were looking at it from a bird's eye view. The door to the kitchen is in the bottom left corner of the living room, and there is a set of double French doors with clear glass, meaning that you can see through into the living room. As I mentioned before, it was me, my mum, and my ex stood in the kitchen having idle conversation about nothing in particular. We were stood around the breakfast bar, which juts out from the main cupboard units and sits just in front of the double French doors. Both of them had their backs to the door, meanwhile I was on the other side facing the doors and subsequently the living room. My dad was upstairs having a shower, and while we were talking, I noticed him walk from where the stairs were towards the sofa, which was directly on the other side of the doors. I saw him sit down and proceed to watch the TV, which was already on. I didn't think anything of it, as he was already in the house anyway, but I did notice something odd. As I'm sure you know, if you live around the same people for some time, you come to notice certain things. The way they sound when they walk down the stairs, the general noise made when moving about and whatnot. My dad isn't a large man, but he does have a distinctive step and isn't particularly quiet. Whilst I saw him sit down on the sofa, I realised I hadn't heard anybody come downstairs. I dismissed this as I was chatting and chalked it up to simply not paying attention. After a minute or two, I entered the living room to ask my dad a question, something regarding the current conversation between the three of us. I walked into the living room and saw that he wasn't on the sofa anymore. That's weird, I thought, as I hadn't seen him get up again. I went upstairs thinking he must have gone back up for something. However, upon getting to the landing on the top of the stairs, I saw the bathroom door open and my dad walking out. He was still wet and had a towel around his waist, despite the fact I'd seen him barely 2 minutes before, fully clothed and downstairs. I told him that I'd seen him down there, but he confirmed that he hadn't been downstairs as he was in the shower. I asked my mum and my ex, and they said they distinctly heard him walking down the stairs, despite not seeing him as their backs were turned. Doppelgangers are said to be the signs of misfortune, bad luck, even death. This incident happened in 2018, and to this day, in June 2025, he's perfectly fine and healthy. I have absolutely no idea what or even who I saw that night, nor do I know why I could see it without hearing it, whilst the other two who were there with me clearly heard it. To this day, there has never been another doppelganger sighting from anybody in the house. Thank you for taking the time to read some of my stories. I'd be happy to share some more at a later date. I'd love for you to take a look at some ghost stories from Pembrokeshire, as we have quite a few well-known ones. The area of Haverfordwest has had a settlement for a long time, dating back to pre-Roman Britain. There's also a 12th century Norman castle which was reduced to ruins after a parliamentarian siege during the Civil War. Again, thank you for allowing me to share some stories with you, and thank you for also such a great podcast. It's definitely helped during those long hours of trucking. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't have any phantom hitchhiker stories just yet, but with the amount of time I spend driving, who knows? Maybe I'll have a story for you one day. Regards, Caleb Jenkins. Our next listener story was sent in by John in Glasgow, who shares experiences related to his departed grandmother and a strange apparition that came at a time when he needed it most. Hi, I'm John and I'm 48 years old and quite level-headed depending on who you ask, but I don't cry ghost if a pillow falls off a sofa. I live in Glasgow, and the 3 experiences I will tell you about are deeply personal and unique to my family. They occurred on 3 different properties, so I'll start with the first, which will validate the second. My dad's mum, was the only grandparent I had in my life, and I was very close to her. I would stay with her whenever I could when I was younger, nearly every weekend, and was often joined by my 2 female cousins, one of whom was a year older and the other a year younger than myself. These weekly meetups will become quite important later on. As time went on, my gran got ill and eventually passed away. The morning she died, I got up and put on my school uniform, then sat on my bed waiting for my mum to come tell me, rather than sitting in front of TV cartoons before school. That detail came back to me as I was writing this story, looking back. It's actually quite strange and out of character. I knew my gran was gone before I was told. After the formalities, my parents were emptying the house, and as they were leaving for the last time, my mum said, "Right, this is it." Took one last look around and switched off the light. At that exact moment, the light bulb fell out of the light and bounced into the corner. This made my mum go a bit quicker out of the door, but she couldn't shake the bulb episode, so she went back, lifted the carpet where the bulb had landed, and found a pile of money hidden underneath. Fast forward 20 years, I was in a new house, all grown up, and was hosting a party. It was the first time me and my cousins were together since our gran's passing. The 3 of us were in the kitchen talking about the good old days, spending weekends at Granny's, when, similarly to my mum's experience, the kitchen light bulb suddenly fell out, landing without breaking. These 2 experiences have never left me. This next story is quite strange. I had just received some life-changing documents and arrived home in a daze. I told my mum and she said, "It'll all work out all right." I went upstairs and sat on a chair that faced out my bedroom door. There were 2 rooms outside my door and a cupboard door facing the rooms. The 2 room doors were old and opened at chest height with old Yale-type locks, which were firmly closed. The cupboard door had a pole to open the loft. Right in front of me, a bright white mass passed across my doorway before moving away from me as it hit the wall and disappeared at the top of the stairs. I was dumbstruck. I checked doors, which were still locked, but most strangely, the pole was swinging back and forth and squeaking as if someone physically had hit it. The mass was silent, about 2 to 3 feet high, and was as thin as a newspaper. It looked like a sheet of smoke, but was moving very fast and physically interacted with the metal pole. I was at a very low point at the time this happened, asking myself how I was going to deal with my problems. Thanks for listening. Feel free to follow up, but I swear these things are true. At no point have I felt negative about any of these events. I have a sense of knowing what or who is behind it and believe it's energy manifesting. Thanks again, John. The following listener story was sent in by Matt, who shares an encounter with a long-departed spirit who not only appeared to him, but kept playing small tricks on his family. He also tells us about the signs he noticed after losing a loved one. Here are his stories. Good evening. Love the show. Going through all the episodes now and love the listener stories. The fact that we can share stories and not be judged, and having a platform to share experiences, it's great. So I wanted to write in. This isn't a scary story, just a memory from my childhood, one that I have never forgotten, and I am in my 40s now. It was 1994 when I was 10 years old, and we lived in a small 2-bedroom house in Hull. Me and my younger brother shared a bedroom, as most of us did back then. We had bunk beds and I was in the top bunk. Our bedroom was small, and I would usually sleep facing my wardrobe so I couldn't see the bedroom door, but one night, I decided to turn the other way. I woke up unsure of the time, but it was still dark and we weren't allowed to leave the landing light on. Standing there, in my bedroom, was what I can only describe as a young boy. He was wearing what I thought was Victorian-style clothes, a flat cap and a tweed waistcoat. He didn't move. I remember being in shock, and as any other 10-year-old would, I hid under the covers, When I looked again, he was gone. The next day I told my parents what had happened, but they chalked it up to my imagination. However, shortly thereafter, we all started to hear noises, banging and tapping, in the loft, both day and night. The house we lived in wasn't old. In fact, I'm pretty sure my parents bought it as a new build when I was 4, so I know no one else had lived or passed away in that property. Things also went missing from different rooms in the house, from small toys to keys and mugs. I had a favourite book that I would put on my wardrobe when I'd finished reading before going to sleep. Then I would wake up to find it on the landing just outside my bedroom. The funny thing is, me and my parents gave the entity a name, Alvin, and any time we heard a voice, or a noise, or something had moved in the house, we would say, "Oh, it's Alvin." I think we did this so we wouldn't get scared. Alvin never did anything violent or harmful, just mischievous. I can't remember when it stopped, but it eventually did. However, those experiences are something I have never forgotten. When I looked into it a little more, the houses on the estate were built on allotments, so I can't explain why or how. I'm just grateful for the pleasant experience, shall we say. I will never forget Alvin. I do have another story, not a haunting, but about signs. I'm not sure whether this is real or if it's a coincidence, but in 2004 we lost our mum at age 47. I heard stories about the last goodbye, which says that people who pass will say goodbye in their own way. I didn't want that, as I didn't want to get scared and was hoping my mother knew that and wouldn't do anything frightening. And she didn't. It's like I was expecting her to show up next to me to say goodbye. I even stayed up all night just in case. Since then, there have been little things happen, like seeing her in my dreams, the kind that feels so real that you wake up disappointed and sad, but it's like she's watching over me. One thing that sits with me is buying my first album by Carlos Santana. The track Smooth was mine and Mum's favourite song. It always reminds me of her when I hear it. It plays often in the summer and puts a smile on my face. We used to go on coach holidays to Spain as kids back in the 90s. So last year I took my wife and my 2 little girls to the same place I used to go to with my mum, dad and brother. On our last night after the kids' disco, the song came on. I even pulled my phone out to record it because I couldn't believe it. But it does bring me great comfort. There are always little signs. Thank you for doing what you do and keep up the good work. I have told so many people about the podcast at home and at work. Thanks again, Matt. Our next listener story comes to us from Nigel and takes place in Kent. Over the course of his life, Nigel has both seen and heard entities that weren't quite of this world. Here is what he shared with us. Hi there. When I discovered your podcast, I became addicted. I thought you may be interested in my own experience. In 1999, I moved into a detached house in a Kent village. The house was built in 1984 on an old brick field. The layout of the house might help visualize what happened. The stairs were in the middle of the house, and on the first floor was a family bathroom on one side and a bedroom on the other, which was used as my office. Across from the top of the stairs was the main bedroom. I can't be sure of the exact timing of the events, but a year or so after I moved in, I began working at home for 2 days a week. All these events took place during the day, not at night. Whilst at home, I started hearing someone walking up the stairs. The first time it happened, I was a bit worried, expecting an intruder, but there was no one. This happened so many times I got used to it, and I remember on one occasion thinking, well, there we are again. I ended up taking no notice and was never scared after that first time. The house never felt haunted. A few years went by, and in 2001 I met my wife-to-be, Sue. Initially, she stayed weekends, then moved in permanently in 2007. One weekend I was in the bathroom crouched down by the cabinet next to the door. I heard footsteps come up the stairs and saw someone stop by the bathroom door, look in at me briefly, then walk into the main bedroom. I was sure it was Sue, so I didn't bother to look up. However, as I couldn't find what I was looking for, I got up and went after her, asking, "Have you seen—" But there was no one there. I went downstairs and found Sue in the conservatory. I asked her if she'd been upstairs, but she insisted she hadn't. I had to sit down. That was the last time I heard footsteps or saw anything. It was almost like it was the last visit. My house cleaner, on the other hand, was convinced someone was there with her and didn't like being on her own in the house. I'm fairly convinced it was the woman who lived in the home previously, because soon after I moved in, I received a condolence card addressed to her husband. We moved to Ireland in 2017 and, as far as I know, there have been no further sightings. On a different track, my mother passed away in 2009, and my brother came over from France to help with arrangements. I was in my bedroom office and he was in the dining room. Suddenly he came up the stairs and asked what happened to our mum's mobile. I told him it was in her bungalow, but he said his mobile had just rung with "Mum calling" on the display. As there was nothing on the call log, I told him he must have fallen asleep and dreamt it. Listening to some of your listeners' stories now, I wonder. He'd also been complaining about an unseen hand tapping him on the shoulder all the time. A few days later, I was amusing myself by looking on Rightmove for the value of my mum's bungalow. I'd just landed on a page for her road when my computer blue-screened, something it hadn't done before or since. I said out loud to the empty room, "Sorry, Mum, maybe too soon?" I could imagine her looking over my shoulder and saying, "For goodness sake, they've not buried me yet, and already they're spending the inheritance." Anyway, keep up the good work. Regards, Nigel Randall. Our next story is a unique and disturbing account about a family's dark secret and the consequences our listener faced when trying to right those wrongs. This story was kindly shared by Polly Walker. I'm writing to share the true and terrifying story of a haunting that unfolded in my own home. A story that began with a forgotten Nazi prophet in my family tree and a cursed book that almost cost me my life. Back in 2009, I had a near-death experience after working as a humanitarian in West Africa. That experience caused me to come to faith and continue my work in Africa. However, in 2017, I began to have spiritual visions. I had one particularly terrifying vision that involved a demonic portal into my family, and that something was attacking my daughter. Then came the most chilling vision, a red book. I heard my departed grandfather's voice, clear as day, commanding me to burn it. "It's an abomination," he said. The message was so strong, I took a train to my parents' home in Yorkshire and prayed that if it was real, I would know. Sure enough, I did know when I saw it. Out of hundreds of old books in my father's study, I reached straight for one, a red volume called The Aryan Testament. I opened it and immediately realized it was no ordinary book. It was a worship text proclaiming Adolf Hitler as the second coming of Christ. I stole the book from my father's shelf, and after seeking advice from various experts and priests, I began to research who my great-uncle Jim really was. I had never been made aware of this part of my family history. My great-uncle was called James Larratt Battersby, one of the UK's most notorious Nazi sympathisers. He was founder of the fascist religious group, the Aryan Brotherhood, and author of that very book. Interred during World War II alongside Oswald Mosley and the infamous Thomas Baker, he proclaimed himself a prophet of Hitler, and later died by suicide in one of the most violent and dramatic ways imaginable, leaping into the paddle wheels of a ferry where he was decapitated after proclaiming himself to be a Christian martyr. With the book in my home, I began to have more and more visions of my grandparents, of Jim, and events of that time. I was shown that the book had been written under full demonic possession, that the words weren't Battersby's alone, but channeled directly. Eventually, I decided that I would burn it, so I did. Foolishly, on the balcony of my South London council flat. From that moment on, my life descended into chaos. For 6 months, it was like living in a horror film. Things flew off shelves and electronic devices malfunctioned constantly. My car failed without explanation. Thick black sludge bubbled up from the sinks and bathtub. I began hearing voices, hundreds of times a day, telling me I was worthless, that I should kill myself, that my daughter didn't love me. I woke up with scratches, bruises, and pressure marks on my neck, and frequently woke up unable to breathe. I lost job opportunities. I relapsed physically and became bedbound. My mother, an atheist and skeptic, came to stay with me and witness the haunting. She heard me screaming in my sleep and moving like I was possessed. We lived like that for 3 months, with everything going on around us, until one day, my 4-year-old daughter overheard our whispered conversations and said, "I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the punting ghost." I asked her what a punting ghost was, and she replied knowingly, "It's the monster that sits on Mummy's back in the night." We were horrified, and that was the moment we started to desperately look for help. I tried everything: church exorcisms, African deliverance services, prayer groups, online ministries, but nothing worked. Eventually, my parents called on the only relatives they knew who worked with energy and spiritual healing, and with their help, I connected to a powerful team of intuitives, including a fearless heathen shaman. It took 4 of them to finally remove the entity from my life. I felt it leave my body. My mother did as well. It took me a year before I could speak about it without crying. Even now, I struggle to explain the layers, the spiritual battle, the historical evil, the ancestral silence. But I know this: the book The Aryan Testament is real. It still circulates today amongst the Aryan Brotherhood membership that lingers on. It is truly an abomination for those who believe in God, and I feel like I paid the price for removing that dark inheritance from my family. I would be honored to share my story on your podcast. With warmth and respect, Polly Walker. Our last listener story, sent in by Sherry, comes to us from across the Atlantic in New York State. Sherry has the ability to open up to the spirit world, and here she shares with us the multiple instances in which she has seen apparitions, many of them dating from the American Civil War. When I was very young, before 3 years of age, I had a scary dream that woke me up. There were huge fish swimming through the tiny apartment where I lived with my mum. Even awake, I still saw the huge fish and I was terrified. That was in Cobleskill, Schoharie County, New York. The entire area had been a giant sea in the distant past. Fossils of sea corals and the like had been found in the area. Of course, at my very young age, I didn't know that. After that, something inside me turned off my paranormal abilities. My mother remarried and things got hard for me. It wasn't until I was a teen that I had another experience. When I was in my teens, I lived in the mid-Hudson Valley in a town called Red Hook. One of my friends lived in an old farmhouse on a road named after the original owner, Seth Morehouse. One evening, we were in her room and the radiator started gurgling. My friend said, "Seth is here." The words were barely out of her mouth when her closet door opened. She told Seth that it was okay, that he could come out, and the door swung shut. Her closet was located in the eaves of the old house. It was fairly large and ran in a narrow space parallel to her bedroom wall. To my utter confusion, amazement and terror, I woke up the next morning, lying in that closet. Many years later, I was in the upstairs of the Schuler house, a historic house here in the village that was Philip Schuler's summer home. He grew and milled flax. The home is now owned by the National Park Service and was never modernized by any of its owners. It's the perfect place for Revolutionary War spirits to hang out. I was upstairs and felt drawn to this small space, kind of like a closet but with no door, so I went inside. Later on, one of the historic interpreters told me that it was the space the ghost liked to hang out in. His name was Lovelace, and his skull was in a box on the mantel downstairs. I believe he was a Tory, loyal to the Crown, who was hung as a traitor. More about him later, because I encountered him again. As a note, poor Lovelace's skull and the other remains were finally laid to rest down at the battlefield sites, about 9 miles south. No more spirit encounters with him after that is what the staff at the house told me. I spent a lot of time roaming all over the Saratoga Battlefield National Historical Park during the 1980s. I had done some spiritual work over the years and was more open psychically, although I could still mostly shut it off. I had 2 dogs, and we'd range all over the battlefield. I decided to open up, and I suddenly felt deep sadness and mourning. Snap. Shut. There's a trail there called Fraser's Death March. The general was mortally wounded and was brought down to a cabin to die in peace. As I walked the trail with a friend, I started having stomach pains. My friend then told me Fraser had been shot in the stomach. I mentioned Lovelace earlier, the loyalist who was hung as a traitor. Before I knew that story, I had walked into a room in our house and seen a man hanging from the overhead light. Our house was very old, another place spirits would feel comfortable in. However, this was the only experience I had there. Snap. Shut. I've lived in my current house on a hillside in the town of Saratoga for over 25 years. We've had dogs and cats all through the years, and some of them have died in the house. I hear them thumping and jumping at night after I've gone to bed. Sometimes they meow. One of my dogs passed away unexpectedly last month, and it was a mind-blowing, heartbreaking shock. But he's still here. I've seen him standing beside my bed at night and frolicking in the backyard. Just yesterday I was returning to my car after leaving the market, and I saw him there, in the car, waiting for me. He was my best companion in the car. Up the hill and to the left is the Victory Woods section of the Saratoga National Historical Park. It was opened sometime in the early 2000s. A park ranger told me that the area had very bad juju, so much so that the archaeologists working on the site would become nauseous, dizzy, or felt a dark presence. Apparently, the Park Service had the area cleansed with light work and crystals. That said, I had walked there often but had not opened myself up, so I decided to try it to see what would happen. I felt an immense, dark coldness from the spring-fed pond in the woods. In another spot I felt dizzy and nauseous. In fact, I had, in the past, seen spirits there, and so had some of my dogs. The British soldiers in those woods in 1777 were starved, cold, and wet. They had taken a 9-mile slog up from the battlefield in our lovely cold, rainy autumn weather. Related to the woods, I frequently saw, while hanging out in the side yard, a flash of someone running for their life while being pursued. The American troops were right on the tails of the British Army. A bit south of Victory Woods is the village of Victory. A friend of mine lived in a very haunted house there. In a scary turn of events, it turns out it was haunted by his father. I worked until midnight, so I'd get to his house quite late the nights I stayed over. My friend was always dead asleep. The first time I saw his dad Lester's spirit, he suddenly flashed in front of me. I felt like he was protecting his son, so I reassured him and walked on by. Another time I had just gone to bed, again late after work, when somebody suddenly and deliberately pushed down my side of the bed. Okay, Lester. The third time he made himself known, there were people over drinking and partying late at night. We were all in the kitchen, and from where I was sitting, I heard someone stomping down the stairs. No one had left the kitchen, and the bathroom was downstairs, so there was no reason for anyone to go upstairs. Okay, Lester, I hear you. This is all I can think of to tell you at this time. I could provide historical links or any other information that would fill gaps in this gap-filled story. This particular area is fascinating, rich in history and spirits. Thank you so much for wanting to hear my experiences. Take good care, Sherry. And that, dear listeners, brings us to the end of part 3 of this fantastic collection of stories. But worry not. We still have one more episode of your often terrifying, always fascinating stories to share. Do you have an interesting story which you'd be willing to share with the show? If so, your story could feature in our end-of-season Listener Stories episodes. Please get in touch with the show via our new Haunted UK Podcast website or email us at contactus@hauntedukpodcast.com, marking the subject as Listener Story. All stories are treated with the utmost privacy and respect. If you wish to remain anonymous, that's no problem at all. So until next time, stay safe and take care.